Four had served the Galactic Engineering Consortium for 312 years. In all that time, the archivist had never encountered an error in the universal elegance algorithm. The algorithm was perfect. It had been perfect since its creation 12,000 years ago. It measured every engineering solution in the known galaxy and rated them according to mathematical beauty, efficiency, and physical possibility. So when found the first contradiction, they assumed they had made a mistake. The entry was simple enough. It described a method for atmospheric scrubbing on colony ships. The solution came from a species called humans, recently contacted by the consortium's exploration fleets. Read the specifications twice, then 3 times. The numbers refused to make sense. The algorithm had given the solution an elegance rating of 97.3%. This was exceptional. Solutions above 90% were rare and valuable. They represented the highest achievements of engineering across all civilizations. But next to this impressive score sat a flag that had never seen before in their entire career. The flag read, "Physically impossible." Stared at the words. The algorithm rated solutions on elegance and possibility separately. A solution could be elegant but impossible. Such things existed in theory. But in 12,000 years of operation, no solution had ever received both a high elegance score and an impossibility flag. The two concepts were opposed. Elegance came from working within physical laws, not against them. The archivist pulled up the technical details. The human atmospheric scrubber used fewer components than thermodynamics allowed. It achieved greater efficiency than the laws of energy transfer permitted. According to every calculation the algorithm could perform, the device should not function. But according to the operational data, it worked perfectly. Crystalline form shifted in what other species might call unease. They summoned their colleague from the adjacent archive chamber. The consensus engineer patted in on soft paws, her feline features arranged in an expression of mild curiosity. "Database corruption," said after examining the entry. Her whiskers twitched dismissively. "The human data must have been entered incorrectly. New species often have trouble with our input formats." "I considered that," replied, "so I checked for similar entries." They displayed the search results, ears flattened against her skull. There were 743 entries, all from human sources, all rated highly elegant, all flagged as physically impossible. The entries covered everything from power generation to structural engineering to medical devices. Each one described a solution that worked in practice but violated theoretical limits. Each one carried the same contradictory flags. "This cannot be accurate," said. Her tail swished in agitation. 700 entries cannot all be corrupted in the same way." "They are not corrupted," highlighted one entry after another. "I have each one against the original human documentation. The data is correct. The impossibility flags are correct. The elegance ratings are correct. Then the algorithm itself must be malfunctioning." "The algorithm has never malfunctioned." They stood in silence for a long moment. The archive hummed around them, storing the collected engineering knowledge of 10,000 civilizations. Somewhere in that vast repository, a species called humanity had broken the rules. Requested the original human documentation. The files arrived within the hour, translated into standard galactic notation. The archivist began to read. The documents were unlike anything in the consortium's records, where proper engineering documentation listed precise specifications and theoretical justifications. The human files contained strange phrases. "Good enough for government work," one notation read. "If it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid," declared another. Most baffling of all was a phrase that appeared repeatedly throughout the technical files. "It just works." Could not understand. How could something just work without explanation? How could engineers accept results without understanding the underlying principles? The very concept violated everything that had been taught. A notification appeared in consciousness, a formal announcement from the consortium's central administration. They read it twice, their crystalline structure flickering with surprise. A human engineer was coming to Prime. Her name was Dr. Sarah, and she had been invited by the consortium's leadership to explain how her species kept breaking the algorithm. She would arrive in 3 standard days. Looked at the 700 impossible entries on their display. Then they looked at the approaching date of Doctor's arrival. For the first time in 3 centuries of service, the archivist felt something that might have been anticipation. Or perhaps it was fear. Either way, knew that the algorithm's 12,000-year record of perfection was about to face its greatest challenge. And somehow, they suspected that the algorithm might not be the one with the problem. Part 2. The Philosophy of Good Enough. Dr. Sarah was smaller than had expected. The human stood barely half the height of the average consortium delegate, her soft biological form wrapped in what she called a lab coat. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in details, assessing, calculating. There was something unsettling about watching her think. "So you're the one who's been flagging all our stuff as impossible," she said, grinning at. "I've got to admit, when I heard about that, I laughed for about 10 minutes. The algorithm flagged your solutions," corrected. "I merely discovered the contradiction." Right, the algorithm. Sarah looked around the demonstration hall where 15 consortium delegates had gathered to witness her presentation. "Well, let's see if I can explain why we keep confusing your perfect machine." The first demonstration went poorly. Sarah had requested basic materials, metal tubing, simple valves, a power source, and various connectors. In 20 minutes, she assembled a working water pump. The device functioned perfectly. It moved water from one container to another with impressive efficiency. The consortium delegates watched in horror. "You skipped 14 steps," said a mathematician, his multiple eyes blinking in distress. "The theoretical foundation calculations alone should take 3 hours. You didn't verify the material stress tolerances," added a structural specialist, her voice trembling. "How do you know the tubing can handle the pressure?" "You never calibrated the power input," said. "The flow rate could be anywhere within a 15% variance." Sarah shrugged. "It works, doesn't it? The water moves, the pump doesn't explode, that's all I needed." The delegates exchanged glances of barely concealed panic. Several excused themselves from the room. One, alike, had to be escorted out by medical staff after their crystalline matrix began to destabilize from stress. After the demonstration, found Sarah in the observation garden, staring out at the stars. The archivist approached carefully, uncertain how to begin. "I believe I may be able to help," said. "If you would permit me to serve as a translator of sorts. Your methods are difficult for my colleagues to understand." Sarah turned to face the crystalline being. "You're the archivist, right? The one who found all those impossible entries." "Yes." "And you're not freaking out like the others. Why?" Considered the question. "I have spent 300 years engineering solutions. I have seen elegant work and crude work, efficient work and wasteful work, but I have never seen solutions that should not function yet do. I find myself curious." Sarah's smile returned. "Curious is good. Curious I can work with. Okay, translator, let me try to explain something." She sat down on one of the garden benches and gestured for to join her. "On Earth, we have this concept called good enough. Do you know what that means?" "The words translate, but I do not understand the concept." "Right. So in human engineering, we don't always need the perfect solution. We need a solution that works for the problem at hand. If I'm building a pump that needs to move water for 10 years, I don't need to calculate the exact stress tolerance to the 15th decimal place. I need to make sure it's strong enough, add a safety margin, and move on." "But how can you know it will function without complete calculations?" Experience, intuition. Sometimes we just try it and see what happens. Sarah laughed at its expression. I know, that sounds insane to you. But here's the thing, humans have been engineering for thousands of years. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've learned what works and what doesn't. We've developed instincts. Instincts are not engineering. Maybe not to you. To us, they're part of the toolkit. Sarah leaned forward. Let me tell you about something we call percussive maintenance. When a machine stops working, sometimes we hit it. Matrix flickered. You strike malfunctioning equipment. It works surprisingly often. Don't ask me why. Something about realigning components or resetting connections. The point is, we don't always need to understand why something works. Sometimes knowing that it works is enough. Over the following days, shadowed Sarah through more demonstrations. The archivist began to see patterns in the human's approach. Sarah treated safety margins as suggestions rather than requirements. She saw theoretical limits as challenges to be overcome. She approached problems with a flexibility that the consortium had never developed. On the fifth day, a crisis struck. One of the station's life support systems began to fail. The algorithm processed possible solutions and returned an estimate, 4 hours for proper repairs. The affected section had 3 hours of air remaining. Sarah studied the readouts for 30 seconds. Then she asked for a welding torch and some spare tubing. You cannot simply bypass the primary filter cascade, the station's chief engineer protested. The secondary systems are not designed for direct flow. Are they designed to handle this pressure and volume? Technically, yes, but the harmonics would create stress patterns that. Will those stress patterns cause failure in the next 3 hours? The engineer hesitated. Probably not. Then give me the torch. 45 minutes later, the life support system was functioning again. The algorithm flagged the solution as elegant but impossible. The 300 beings in the affected section continued to breathe. That evening, the consortium convened an emergency session. Some factions wanted human engineering methods banned from the database entirely. Others wanted to study them. A few, speaking quietly, suggested that perhaps the algorithm itself needed. Sat in the gallery watching the debate. Sarah sat beside them, apparently unconcerned. Your methods saved lives today, said quietly, but they have also caused considerable distress. I know, I'm sorry about that. Sarah shook her head. I don't mean to upset anyone, it's just the way you all do things. It's not really engineering, not the way we understand it. What would you call it? Sarah considered for a moment. Physics with extra steps. You understand physical laws perfectly. You calculate everything precisely, but you never push. You never try things just to see what happens. You never ask, what if we're wrong about the limits? And humans do. Humans do little else. Sarah smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. We've been wrong so many times. We've failed over and over. But every failure taught us something. Every time someone said something was impossible, some idiot somewhere tried it anyway. And sometimes, just often enough, the idiot was right. Look down at the arguing delegates. The algorithm had never been wrong. The consortium had never been wrong. But perhaps, the archivist thought, being wrong was not the worst thing that could happen to an engineer. Perhaps being right, always and forever, was worse. Part 3. Elegant Impossibility. The distress call came at what humans would call 3 in the morning. The consortium colony ship Eternal Precision was experiencing cascading system failures. 12,000 beings were aboard. They had 2 hours of life support remaining. Was among the first to reach the Emergency Coordination Center. The algorithm was already processing solutions, its vast computational matrices analyzing every possible repair option. The numbers scrolled across the main display, each one carrying a timestamp for implementation. The shortest viable solution would take 6 hours. There must be alternatives, said. The consensus engineer's fur was standing on end, her usual calm completely shattered. 17,000 solutions and not one can be implemented in time. The failures are interconnected, the senior coordinator explained. Each repair requires prior repairs to be completed. The sequence cannot be shortened without causing additional failures. Then we watched 12,000 people die. No one answered. There was no answer to give. Looked around the room at the frozen faces, the paralyzed experts, the algorithm that could not help them. Then the archivist made a decision that 300 years of service had never prepared them for. "Get doctor," they said. Sarah arrived within minutes, her hair disheveled and her lab coat thrown on oversleeping clothes. She took one look at the situation display and began asking questions. What's the primary failure point? Can you reroute power around the damaged section? What about the auxiliary systems? Are they truly isolated or just classified that way? The coordinator stared at her. The auxiliary systems are not designed for main operations. They cannot handle the load. Can they handle it for 2 hours? That would require bypassing safety interlocks and connecting systems that were never meant to interface. The power fluctuations alone would. Would they cause immediate catastrophic failure? No, but the long-term damage. Long-term doesn't matter if everyone's dead in 2 hours. Sarah pulled up a schematic of the ship systems. Here's what I'm thinking. We reroute emergency power through the waste processing conduits. They're not designed for it, but the capacity is there. Then we use the ship's rotational momentum to boost the atmospheric processors. It's inefficient as hell, but it might buy us time. The algorithm says that solution is impossible, said quietly. The algorithm also says my atmospheric scrubber shouldn't work, and yet here we are breathing. Sarah looked around the room. Look, I know this isn't how you do things. I know it violates your principles, but principles don't matter if the people who hold them are dead. The senior coordinator shook their head. I cannot authorize this. The consortium has protocols. Then let me speak to someone who can break them. Stepped forward. The archivist's crystalline form was flickering rapidly, patterns of light racing through their structure. When they spoke, their voice carried a harmonic resonance that made everyone in the room pause. I have served this consortium for 312 years. I have more engineering solutions than any being in this room. And in all that time, I have never seen elegance in watching people die, because our procedures would not let us save them. Turn to face the coordinator directly. Doctors' methods are unorthodox. They violate our principles. They confuse our algorithm, but they work. I have seen them work with my own sensors. If there is even a chance that she can save those 12,000 lives, we must try. Elegance without survival is meaningless. The room fell silent, then slowly stepped forward to stand beside. I concur, the consensus engineer said. Let her try. One by one, others joined them. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was enough. Sarah opened a communication channel to the Eternal Precision. For the next 90 minutes, she guided the ship's engineering crew through the impossible repair. Her instructions were fast, sometimes imprecise, occasionally punctuated by phrases that made the consortium observers wince. Just jam it in there. No harder than that. Does it fit? Good enough. Now connect the blue wire to anything that looks important. Yes, I know there are 20 blue wires. Pick one. The ship's power fluctuated wildly. Warning alarms sounded throughout the vessel. At one point, an entire deck lost gravity for 30 seconds. But the life support held. When the rescue ships finally arrived 4 hours later, they found the Eternal Precision limping through space on systems that the algorithm insisted could not possibly function together. The ship was damaged. Many of its components would need complete replacement, and its engineering crew had aged visibly from stress. But all 12,000 passengers were alive. In the aftermath, the algorithm processed Sarah's solution. The result appeared on screens throughout the consortium, elegance rating 94.7%. Status: physically impossible. Then, for the first time in its 12,000-year existence, the algorithm added a new category to its classification system: human viable. Found Sarah in the observation garden again 3 days later. The human engineer was leaving on the next transport, returning to Earth to continue her work. The archivist had one more question. "I have been thinking about our conversations," said, "about how your species developed these methods. You said that humans try things even when they believe them to be impossible. But how did you know to try in the first place? How did you learn that the limits could be broken?" Sarah laughed. It was a warm sound, full of something was beginning to recognize as affection. "That's the thing," she said. "We didn't know the limits existed. Nobody ever told us what was impossible. We just saw problems and tried to solve them. By the time someone explained that our solutions shouldn't work, they already did." Ignorance as an advantage. Something like that. Sarah smiled. Maybe that's our real contribution to galactic civilization. We're too stubborn to know when to quit. We're too ignorant to know what's impossible. And sometimes, just often enough, that's exactly what you need. After Sarah departed, returned to the archives. The archivist had work to do. The consortium had requested a formal designation for human engineering methods in the database. After much deliberation, the council had approved suggestion. The new category would read: solutions which function through mechanisms not yet understood, rated elegant by outcome rather than process. But was not content to simply update the database. The experience with Doctor had changed something fundamental in the archivist's understanding. For 300 years, had believed that engineering was about understanding the rules. Now they understood that engineering was also about knowing when the rules were incomplete. The archivist began to write, not a technical entry, but something new, a treatise exploring the gap between what the algorithm said was possible and what human engineers achieved anyway. The document would be controversial. It might even be rejected by the consortium's academic authorities. But had learned something from humanity. Sometimes you had to try things even when you weren't sure they would work. The title came easily, on the engineering validity of close enough. Somewhere out in the galaxy, the algorithm continued to process solutions. It continued to flag human entries as elegant and impossible. And slowly, carefully, the engineers of the consortium began to ask a question they had never thought to ask before. What if impossible was just another word for not yet understood? The universe, realized, was much larger than the algorithm had ever imagined. And somewhere in that vast expanse, a small species on a small planet was teaching the stars that the rules were made to be broken. One impossible solution at a time. The end.